there, everybody. Mark Drake here again. Listen, one of the important things for us to learn, if we're really going to understand the truth, we say that we quote Jesus, the truth shall set you free. But for us to come into freedom, we have to really understand the truth, the whole truth, and as they say, nothing but the truth. For us to do that, we have to practice in our Bible study something that we call comparing common scripture. In other words, if we're going to learn the truth about a particular subject, we need to find all the places in the scripture that refer to that subject. David makes a statement in the Psalms where he says, the sum of your words is truth, O Lord. The sum, the totality of God's words about any particular subject. That's where we must get our understanding of what God's truth really is. And on the subject of faith, doubt, fear, one of the things that I read many years ago in my earlier days was the example of Job, and the particular author that I was reading took the perspective that Job's troubles were actually a result of his fear and unbelief. This particular teacher, preacher, writer said that Job actually brought these terrible events on himself because of his unbelief, because of his fear, because of his negative words, and that we bring stuff on us if we use negative words. And so he pointed out to the fact that Job said to his friends, the thing that I greatly feared has now come upon me. And they said, you see, that's Job's negative words. He brought those things on him because of that. Well, is that true? And if it is, aren't we all in a lot of trouble based on the words that we say? And are our words really that powerful? Sure, they can affect the way we think sometimes and our attitudes, of course. Paul tells us that we need to think on those things which are good and truthful and positive and righteous and uplifting, and absolutely. But what about this issue of Job, and is he a bad example? In fact, some people have taken this so far that a few years ago when Matt and Beth Redman wrote a song called Blessed is the Name of the Lord, taken from the story of Job, and they used the words of Job, the Lord gives and takes away. There were a lot of churches, a lot of charismatic churches especially, that refused to sing that song, saying that we should not look at Job as a good example. Well, here would be a question that would be wise to ask. Does the New Testament refer to Job? We have the whole story in the Old Testament, but what did the apostles think about Job? Did they have a particular point of view about Job? And since they were the ones who walked and talked with Jesus, since they were the ones who got the original revelation of the New Covenant, if we're going to establish our thinking and our truth, both about Job and about our fears, our doubts, our negative words, shouldn't we find out what the early apostles thought? Well, all you have to do is get out a concordance and look up the name Job, and we find out that indeed the New Testament does talk about Job. In the book of James, of course, James, the writer of this letter, this book, was the brother of Jesus, and in his writings, this is what he has to say. This is James chapter 5, and beginning in verse 11. And of course, James is talking in much of his letter about trials and troubles and suffering and enduring. And this is what he says: we give great honor to those who endure under suffering. For instance, you know about Job, a man of great endurance, and you see how the Lord was kind to him at the end, for the Lord is full of tenderness and mercy. That's what the New Testament writers had to say about Job. Their perspective on Job was he was a righteous man. In fact, when you read the story of Job, God said Job is a righteous man and he is full of integrity. Twice the book of Job says that in all of his sufferings, Job never impugned God for his own lack of integrity. He never judged God as being unfaithful. So the New Testament takes the perspective that in fact Job is someone we should model, because he went through intense times of suffering, and yet what he learned was that God was full of mercy, abounding in loving kindness, and that even in the midst of severe trial, God would be faithful. So when we get to the end of the book of Job itself, chapter 42, Job says this. Job replied to the Lord, verse 1. Job replied to the Lord, "Now I know that you can do all things, and no plan of yours can be thwarted." I want you to think about for a minute. When you read the story of Job and you make a list of all the suffering he endured, it's nearly beyond imagination that somebody could hold up underneath all that he endured. But here's what he says he learned. God, now I know that you control all things. You can do all things, and none of your plans for me can ever be thwarted. I don't know about you, but I can't imagine any greater statement of faith than to declare in the midst of suffering, God, your plans can never be thwarted. I want you to know that that truth is the same for you. I don't care what you've done, how bad you've messed up, what bad choices you've made. You may have to endure some tough times, but the thing that will hold you secure is the knowledge that beyond our comprehension, none of God's plans for us can ever be thwarted. If you want to learn more about this, go to markdrake.org and keep on growing in the grace of Jesus Christ, living in you and through you to the glory of God.